Today, we're digging into a really heavy report from the Justice Square Foundation. It looks at what happened to judges and prosecutors in Turkey right after the attempted coup back in July 2016.
The whole thing kicks off with this really fundamental question, right? It's something that gets to the very heart of this story. What on earth happens to a society when the very people who are supposed to uphold the law suddenly find themselves desperately needing justice?
And this report, it doesn't pull any punches. It dives deep into the aftermath of a massive purge, documenting the profound human tragedies that befell members of the Turkish judiciary. Okay, so let's get into it. The report alleges that the mass dismissal of literally thousands of legal professionals after July 2016, well, that's what set the stage for what it describes as a huge crisis inside the Turkish justice system.
Now, this number, 2,258, it's a really critical piece of context. The report cites this data from Turkey's own Ministry of Justice. It's the total number of inmates who died while in custody between 2018 and 2023. It just paints a really grim picture of prison conditions during that whole period.
So, from that wider picture, the report then zooms in specifically on the purged members of the judiciary. It highlights cases where it alleges death was the result of inhumane conditions, neglect, and even the denial of basic medical care. First, there's the case of Supreme Court member Mustafa Erdoğan. I mean, just get this. He was arrested in his hospital bed right after brain surgery. He spent 6 months in a prison ward, half paralyzed. The report says his lawyers begged for his release, but their requests were denied again and again, right up until he fell into a coma. He was finally released on August 18th, and he died just 5 days later.
And then you have Judge Teğmen Gökçe. He spent 16 months in solitary confinement. He died at just 49 years old after collapsing in his cell. And the report raises this awful question of whether the emergency alert system was even working when he needed it the most. But the tragedies weren't just confined to prison walls. The report also details a whole other category of tragedy. You see, facing prosecution and legally blocked from leaving the country, some purged members of the judiciary tried to flee Turkey. And the consequences? Well, they were often just devastating.
Just consider the story of dismissed Judge Fatma Işık and her husband. To escape what was coming, they got on a boat headed for Greece with their 2 little boys. When that boat capsized in the Aegean Sea, both of their children, 4-month-old Maher and 3-year-old Ibrahim, were lost.
And this wasn't an isolated incident. The report tells a hauntingly similar story about a dismissed prosecutor, Ibrahim Gündüz, and his wife Nurdan. They had only been married for 4 months. They tried to make the same crossing to the Greek island of Kos. Their boat also capsized, and both of them drowned.
So beyond deaths in custody, or during these incredibly dangerous escape attempts, the report documents a significant number of deaths from serious illness. And it argues these weren't just random. They were often directly linked to the immense stress, trauma, and persecution these people experienced after being kicked out of their posts.
The list is it's long. For example, you have Judge Alparslan Gungar, who was diagnosed with fatal lung cancer after spending 18 months in prison. And then there's this one particularly tragic case, Judge Lale Yildiz. She was actually cleared, exonerated, and got her job back, only to suffer a fatal heart attack while at work. The report links her death directly to the immense pressure she'd been under.
The report then goes a step further, into even darker territory. It alleges that a culture of impunity led to widespread torture and ill treatment inside Turkey's detention centers and prisons.
The report includes direct testimony, like this absolutely chilling quote from the court statement of an anonymous judge, who is only identified as AK. He describes being told he would be handed over to the anti-terror branch, where he would, quote, experience things he couldn't even imagine. And the report is really careful to stress that these aren't just isolated allegations. It points out that major international bodies, we're talking Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, even the UN Committee Against Torture, they were all raising similar serious concerns about the treatment of detainees in Turkey during this period.
So this brings us to the final section of the report, which focuses on maybe the most bitter irony of all. Cases where any kind of justice, any semblance of it, just arrived far, far too late. And this is maybe the most powerful illustration of that old legal saying, right? That justice delayed is justice denied.
The report ends with a case of Mesut Gungar, a member of the Council of State. After being dismissed and put in prison, he had a fatal heart attack on July 7, 2023. Just 4 days later, on July 11th, the
European Court of Human Rights issued its ruling, his detention had been unlawful all along.
So the report from Stichting Justice Square really just leaves us with this final, powerful question. It forces you to think about the bigger implications for any society when its own legal guardians are only found to be innocent after they're already dead. What does that ultimately mean for the rule of law itself?